Well, good evening, people. David McMillan here in what should be, part 3 of, Jed and Kevin Go Mad? Not exactly. It's part 3 of the first-time attempts of smuggling. They didn't really dream about the mechanics or quite nut out how they were going to actually sell it to somebody they could trust when they returned to their home countries, and Jed's from the United States and Kevin from the UK. How are they getting on? Jed Pontiac from Centerville, Ohio, he worked for a car dealership there, and Kevin Block from Cambridge in England have never met, don't know each other, but coincidentally, at the same time, they've managed to overcome the COVID-19 regulations and make their way into Colombia. On advice, they've been staying in Cartagena. And where do they go from there? They go a little bit down south, towards Cali. I should point out that Jed's contact didn't really pan out very well, and nor did Kevin's. Really, making one telephone call before you go, that's not really a deal maker, is it? But still, supreme confidence, and Kevin from the UK believes he can pick up a contact just by being in the right place at the right time. And maybe that will be true. Jed, on the other hand, having come through Mexico and really taken a closer look at the lay of the land, he had some friends who were scallywags of their own back in the States, and they gave him some advice here and there. In fact, quite a few of them managed to give him rather a lot of advice, because Jed, after all, managed to get his backup passport, his false identity, through somebody who, well, naturally enough, kind of worked out that he was going to South America and is keenly awaiting the product of whatever Jed manages to get. So, what happens when they get to Cali? Well, their mysterious advisor on some matters, and we don't know whether he can be trusted, but modesty forbids me from going further into him, has put them in a 3-star hotel temporarily. They are not entirely alone. Yep, that's right. Jed's girlfriend has travelled south of the border too, but directly, not from Mexico. Jed's girlfriend, Myra Pink, has arrived in town, but she's not staying with him just at the moment. Well, she is, but she's out shopping. She didn't think much of the food in the hotel and has just gone to the supermarket. Myra is a girl who, well, she was an actress at one stage, spent some time in New York, didn't think much of Ohio, but she's a kind of go-getter, a bit of a tearaway. But she's a little thoughtful. She took the pink stripes out of her hair, which was her trademark, and dyed it into a kind of mousy yellow for the trip to South America. So I can't say that everybody concerned in this little enterprise is a half-wit. But we have this night in the 3-star hotel when both Kevin and Jed have got nothing much to do. So they go down to the hotel bar, which is not much of a bar, really. It's connected to the breakfast nook, which is kind of stale-smelling. But in the way of these things, they kind of strike up a conversation. Remember, they're seated at the bar about, 4 stools away from each other. Smile, nod, and because of the language, because English was used to order the drink when Jed asked for one. He's a Jack Daniels guy, by the way. And Kevin ordered a beer, cerveza. He knew that much Spanish. They started up a conversation. Now, I've been in such conversations in the past. I was in a hotel, many years ago in Bangkok, and the guy a couple of stools away from me had longish hair, but forgive me, because this was the early 80s, Hawaiian shirt, a bit rangy, a bit skinny, a bit nervy, had a gold ring which he spun around with his thumb, so it wasn't quite his size. It makes me kind of think he got it from somewhere else. We even got talking about Thailand, local customs, all sorts of things. So I was getting tired of this beating about the bush, and I opened it. And do you know what the opener was? Well, of course, Bangkok, I said, you can get anything you like in this town. A little nervous light bulb twitched in my companion's face, and within minutes we were talking about the local drug scene, what you could get, whether Thai sticks were still Thai sticks. But we were heading further up market, and soon enough we were talking about the 1.4 gram number 5s, the little plastic bottles of A-grade heroin that was available. But let's zoom away 20 years from that. I only mention that because people can and do find the people they're looking for. So Kevin and Jed are talking. What are they talking about? Things that Americans and British people have in common, or don't have in common. But I'll save you a lot of to and forth. They really... okay, they couch what they're saying by, well, talking about the local Coke and what it's like, and it's only personal use. But any observer of these two, as they moved at the point of transition in the conversation to general touristy things into Coca-Cola, they moved up to sitting next to each other. And Kevin, being from Cambridge, pretty much came out with a question. They're good in Cambridge in forming questions. He asked Jed, "Have you got a good local contact?" Jed rather froze at that. Now, you'll get a lot of conflicting advice here. Some people will say, go to a foreign country and be very wary of the locals. Better to speak to one of your countrymen, or at least somebody from the West who knows his way around, a local guy, and you'll get the good skinny, the good dirt, the real information. Well, frankly, you won't. You're more likely to get screwed over by an expat living in some country that is a bit more of a battle to survive. And how do those expats survive? They leech on their fellow countrymen. So that's something that perhaps Jed, who goes on his instincts, was a bit wary when Kevin asked him for a contact. What was he going to do? To test the waters? Of course, what he really came back with, and probably what you might if you were in that situation, was ask Kevin, what contact? I don't know. What's yours been like? He had Kevin there. But Jed started to become nervous. He imagined some scenario where, British are famous for being spies, right? Some scenario that this Kevin might in fact be somebody as a plant, a local man, of course not DEA, but the British equivalent, which there isn't exactly. It's a free-for-all. So what Jed did, and I think it was quite a good move, he looked around the bar and over to the tables where people were eating, and he saw a guy, seemed to be a local, finishing off a big plate of meat, almost ready to leave. And he said to Kevin, "There's your man. No, he's great. He won't admit to knowing me, but that's his clever style. You go to him. His name's Pablo." Now, Kevin didn't really know what to make of this, but at this stage he's kind of desperate, so he takes the advice. Jed leaves, calls who he calls and says, "I don't want to be part of this hotel anymore," and sure enough, he's moved on. Kevin, meanwhile, after a few stumbling bits of introductions and asking, this guy's just finished his plate of entrails, he needs a driver and could he get one and all of that kind of thing. And they agree to meet the next day. Jed returns to his room. Myra comes back from the supermarket and they have a little chat about what's gone on. This is as Jed's packing his bag because he doesn't want to be part of this hotel any longer. Myra agrees, it's just a bit too low rent for her. But Jed admits to Myra at this stage that he's already entrusted virtually all of his money for the buy, enough for 2 kilos, which he's stumped up almost $6,000 for. By the way, that's a little over the odds, but we can forgive that. He's already stumped up that money in Cartagena through a kind of a contact. Well, certainly somebody who said he was somebody who could arrange it. Now, Jed, of course, was reluctant to pay the money beforehand, but there was a great golden opportunity, and to strike now was the best thing. And I don't know, Jed, as I said, he goes on his instincts, and he thought he threw out a big enough carrot. Sure, you can run away with this $6,000, he told the fellow, but that will be the end, you know. If there's some terrible tragedy, you're going to come and tell me later on that things didn't work out. I'll be going back to the US empty-handed, and you won't be getting the double up, the triple up reward from when I return. Now that's quite a convincing argument. Well, it would have been, except that really the guy at the hotel in Cartagena was nothing much more than a pimp who left the room with the $6,000, actually with the intentions of doing something right. Well, right by him, which was to spend the $6,000, come back with, a little half ounce, just enough to intrigue Jed there and lure him into getting more money. Myra listens to all of this as she too is packing and is bitterly disappointed, very upset. But they move to another hotel. Now, Myra holds out a little bit of hope. But day 1 passes, day 2, day 3, and there's no word from Cartagena. Seems to be something wrong with the Movie Mobile. I think that's the local cell phone company. The line's not getting through. Besides, burner phones are easy to throw away. So the pimp from Cartagena has made off with the money, and Myra and Jed are a bit stuck. For the moment. But things change. Back with Englishman Kevin, who was directed into the fellow diner, Pablo, simply by Jed to get rid of him or misdirect him, and Kevin introduced himself asking for a driver. They met the next day to drive up the hills and overlook the valleys. It turns out that Pablo, it was never really Pablo, by the way, his name's Rodrigo, does know somebody and can do something. In fact, that's not as rare as you might think. Bear in mind that in that city, the same with just about anywhere in Colombia, you're only 2 steps away from somebody who knows somebody pretty good connected with that business. So it's not extraordinary that you might find somebody. It's just going to be more extraordinary how much it will cost you. But Kevin has his own idea of how he's going to pack it. He's going for 4 kilos. He's got some bottles of liqueur, in those dark labeled bottles that you can barely see through. Those are his chosen methods. All he's had to do is bring a bottle of Polish spiritus, 96% proof alcohol, and he can dissolve the coke, break up the blocks, which I think is always a bit of a pity, and put the paste back into the bottles, which he'll get back later on. How's that working out for him? Well, we'll never quite know because, well, I'll stick with the name Pablo because that will serve for Kevin's man. Pablo and his new friend seem to have other plans for Kevin. What are they? Pablo Rodriguez, he's gained an extra name, has convinced our Kevin that the whole idea of using the bottles is much too dangerous, and especially leaving Colombia, that he will never get out with them. And frankly, that's pretty much true. The searchers leaving Colombia, even in relatively provincial cities, are quite strong. They certainly would look at bottles of liqueur with great suspicion. They would simply test the things, and it wouldn't take much to pick up the traces. So in that sense, Pablo Rodriguez was giving good advice. So rather than being lost, Kevin is inveigled into actually changing countries. Indeed, Pablo Rodriguez has contacts all around South America. He could get Kevin to leave even from Argentina, right across the other side of the country. But he's not going that far. Within a few days, Kevin finds himself in Lima, capital city of Peru. And why? Because, like so many thousands of people, he is going to visit Machu Picchu. Or all of you will know that Machu Picchu are the famous Inca ruins of a citadel built over 500 years ago, some 7,000 feet high, in the Cuzco region of Peru. Now, what's the connection for Kevin? Pablo Rodriguez wants Kevin to actually go there to Cuzco to see the ruins, as so many people do. And by the way, they've only just recently opened up again for tourists. So as I speak in November of 2020, it is possible for our intrepid first-time runner to go there. With some difficulty, and admittedly there are not too many people there. Is that a good thing? Well, any smuggler will tell you he'd rather be lost in a crowd than singled out as a lone traveller. But it's not quite that bad. There are some... Machu Picchu is for the hardier of travellers. You don't get many, 80-year-olds at 7,000 feet. Well, not for long. So Kevin's itinerary is to visit Machu Picchu and then fly down from Cuzco on the day of his departure and pick up the bag and then fly on from Lima. Good plan? Well, it could be a good plan. The thing with it, here it is. Kevin's bag has already been packed. The dope has been mixed into a plastic surrounding of his suitcases, and he's got 2 of them, which is rather a lot for a traveller. But nonetheless, it makes the load on the top and bottom of the suitcases a little bit better, and he's got some distracting crap inside. Not that that will help terribly much. But it should be borne in mind that Lima Airport is an extremely iffy place to get through. I can't count the number of couriers who've fallen there. Men, women, everybody, old, young. It is a dangerous place to travel through. However, there is one way. It is possible if you take the last flight out of Cuzco Airport, and this is the local airport to the Machu Picchu ruins. If you take the last flight of the day, and that leaves around 4:30 in the afternoon, and why isn't there a later one? It's because of the weather conditions. A great mist rises around the airport, and really the plane is too dangerous for those smaller aircraft to fly. But here's the point. Let's just say the itinerary, and it's most likely to be so for Kevin, is to fly from Cuzco down to Lima, from Lima onto Madrid, because there are direct flights there all the time. In the normal course of events, Kevin's luggage would be unloaded as from the domestic section of the Lima airport, and he would have to schlep them over to the international section, check them in. And that's where he's at most risk. However, if he takes that last flight, the connecting time between that flight and the one that goes on to Spain is about 90 minutes, and usually less because of delays. So what the airline very kindly do, they double-check in the bag at Cuzco, so it's tagged to be transit in Lima, and Kevin won't have to touch the damn thing. So he can walk through just with his hand luggage at Lima, board the plane. And that's so much better. He won't have that nervousness that comes of being minder to 4 kilos of coke. But there's a thing with this deal. It's really the Pablo Rodriguez deal, isn't it? It's no longer Kevin as the independent smuggler, the one he dreamed of. It's kind of that he's working for them. Really, at this stage, Kevin is no longer the independent smuggler. He's merely a courier, a mule for Pablo Rodriguez. Or so it would seem at the time. Is he on the last flight, though? No, knowing Pablo, and the many Pablos as I do, they are really sloppy about taking this opportunity. I don't know why. It's a combination of keeping their distance from the courier and over-mothering it. You know, they'll put him in the wrong hotel. They'll make telephone calls they shouldn't. And famously, in the real Pablo's case, he used to give the same SIM card to every damn courier that came in. And the DEA used to monitor all of those and then hand the information on to the local Peruvian authorities. Not always, oddly enough. They'd like to follow some through. But let's just say they didn't in this case. It would have worked out for Kevin had he simply been the courier in this piece. Well, not altogether badly. He wouldn't have been completely cheated. He would have gone on to Madrid, assuming he got through all of that, then continued on to London, assuming he got through that, and then the Colombians would have relieved him of his cargo and done what they do. Well, they'd even go as far as to get Kevin to drop it off somewhere that they had in mind. Though I'd like to think they would have at least asked him who he knew, that maybe they could get more. But of course, they'll know the prices in the UK rather exactly. And I hear, as one does, that the price here has gone up to something like £40,000 per kilo from its £34,000. Put it down to a pandemic levy on the thing. But that's not what happened. No. Kevin was on a late flight, but all the flights were cancelled. So he was a no-show at Lima. Did Pablo Rodriguez understand all that? Did they know what was going on? No. When there was no sign of Kevin anymore, they assumed, like so many before, that he was just another of the fallen couriers. So they made themselves scarce. In fact, Pablo went on to his next plan, which was some other place, some other time. We don't really need him anymore. But what did Kevin do? Kevin, who had not liked this sort of arrangement of being, even he could see that he would end up being just as a courier, didn't like it terribly much. He was willing to grudgingly accept it, but when he found that his flights to the capital, Lima, were cancelled and he was on one the next day, he rather had a bit of a thought as he was flying down in what was a domestic flight and landed and there was nobody there. He thought this might be the opportunity to become an independent man once again. And indeed, that's what he was. He wisely abandoned the tickets that they'd helped him get and arranged with a different airline to travel on to... yes, did he go to Madrid? Well, he did, but it was connecting transit through to Lisbon in Portugal. That was some bit of advice he'd picked up along the way. So he's booked to travel out that within 24 hours. And he's not doing a lot of hiding. Not hiding from Pablo Rodriguez if they turn up in his new hotel or see him around. He'll turn on them and say, "You guys, you left me, abandoned me. I didn't know what to do. I presumed you'd get in contact." Yuck. It wouldn't all end up in ugliness. Hope springs eternal in that game. But what's happening with dear Jed and Myra? Having scooted away in a hurry from their brief encounter with Kevin because they thought he might have been some kind of a spy. Well, they're on their own mission. Jed had entrusted his money to somebody in Cartagena who turned out to be just a scoundrel and disappeared, and Jed and Myra waited in their new hotel for a few days, tried the number again, and realized nothing was going to come of it. But Myra, enterprising as she is, she's made a girlfriend around town, and they've been looking about the place, and this girl, Karen, is worldly wise and has somebody in mind. And this time, this somebody is for real. It is one of the dealers in Cali who is actually, well, I can go as far as to say it is a woman. Not exactly the Ma Barker caricature of a female godfather figure, but she's a mid-level wholesaler dealer and a good person, trustworthy, sensible. The wholesaler in Cali who supplied them with 3 kilos, well, she wants to be paid, which is about the same as the 6,000 that Jed has already lost. He'll need to get the money. They've kind of used it all up somehow. But Jed is not without resources. He has somebody back in Ohio who's owed him money for quite a long time and looks like he's ready to pay it and likely to pay it. If you're traveling overseas, you don't want to be contacting maybes and ifs. You need somebody who's going to do what he says. And he did know somebody who would do that. Myra knew that their old pal, Carl, back in Ohio, who owed them $8,755. It's an exact figure for exact reasons connected with the car business. But Carl was not just in the car business. He was a bit in the everything business. He said he had that money and he was going to pay them. And genuinely this is so. So soon Jed and Myra will be in a position to pick up the 3 kilos because they'll have the 6,000 and a bit of change to buy other things which they'll need. Their tickets they want to change, lots of little trimmings, and they've gone to a somewhat better hotel, though in my opinion they should have stayed clear of that. Nonetheless, they're rather edging into too much time in Colombia. You don't want to be staying there more than 10 days. 7 to 10 days is plenty. You start to push at the boundaries of the 30-day visa, and you're pushing at the boundaries of your luck. So, is Carl going to send the money? Indeed he is. Carl has the money. He even contacts Western Union and checks the fees, makes some arrangements with that, some phony ID to send it. He doesn't want to be sending money by Western Union to Colombia in his own name. Carl's about to do that, but he has to go and retrieve the cash, which he's had buried on the property of a friend of his. Unfortunately, there's a little twist in the progress of the scheme. As Carl's about to go and pick up that money from the little pile of wood out the back of the property of his friend, Wayne, he notices that he's been noticed. Yes, Carl has a few outstanding warrants. And in fact, he's rounding a corner as 2 police cars are rounding on him. He just manages to get to a telephone and call Wayne. Now, he tells Wayne that he won't be around for a while, but it is essential that he go and dig that money out from the wood pile and send it on. And he gives him the details, which Wayne scribbles down. Now, is Wayne the right sort of person to ask this? As Carl Buttgeek, no relation, leaves the relative safety of the payphone, having asked his friend Wayne to get the money and send it on, as he leaves that, the police cars stop and they take him away. So he's out of the scene. The fate of our little deal for Jed and Myra depends on Wayne taking the necessary steps. Has he written down the information correctly? Yes, indeed he has. He's quite a scribbler, is old Wayne. In fact, he's written a couple of manifestos in his time, because Wayne Mange is an outdoorsman. He is planning for the end of days. He's a pretty good shot with a rifle. He loads his own ammunition, has a little workshop out the back, which he weighs out the grains of powder and puts little crosses in the top of the hollow points. Wayne has got dreams of his own, not in smuggling, though he's been fond of a bit of crystal meth in his time, but in changing the world, or being ready for the end when it comes, because he really doesn't like anything to do with big government. So, of course, Wayne is a fan of Trump, Donald Trump. And why am I telling you this? As we come to the end of episode 3 of Kevin and Jed on the cocaine trail, well, Jed is reliant on the funds coming through by Western Union. The money is in the hands of Wayne Mange, and he would send it on. Indeed he would. But there's something bothering him just at the moment, as we speak. Wayne has spent most of his money on the bunker, on the little fortress underground that is immune to gas attacks and is stocked with about 5 years' dry provisions and water filtration equipment, gas masks, all of that kind of thing, and lots of weaponry. But even though Wayne doesn't believe in government, doesn't trust anybody, he was very disappointed that Mr. Trump failed. Not that he admits it yet, but failed he did. Through the silo of Wayne Mange's underground bunker, we can see that he's torn between a certain amount of loyalty to Carl to follow instructions, and he sees himself as a rather military type, so he understands following an order, torn between that and the need for funds for his own special project, which has become necessary, one he thought might not be. And as we look across his table of drying fruit, we see a little map of Greenville in Wilmington, Delaware. There's a house there, and on it, circled nearby the main building, there's a kind of, bit of the landscape, a kind of grassy knoll. What could that possibly mean? Will that come to anything? Will we have, what would it be, 6.5 years of President Harris? Or will Donald reign because there was no other candidate remaining? Well, we'll have to wait until part 4, in which the smuggler's trail continues. Bye for now. I'm starting to think there's rather too many characters that are introducing in this little speculation here. I'll put in the description box a bit of an outline of who's who and where they're at in case it all becomes too much. But let's see how they go. I'm sure everything will be well, where it should be well.